Constructed in 1868, this three-bedroom residence was acquired by a local entrepreneur, Josiah B. Moore, in 1903. Josiah, his wife Sarah, and their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, resided in the modest frame home on 2nd Street, embodying an ideal family. However, on June 9, 1912, the entire family was tragically murdered, along with their 2 visitors, Ina May and Lena Stillinger. This is the tale of the notorious Villisca Axe Murder House. On the evening of June 9, 1912, the Moore family and the visiting girls went to the Presbyterian Church, where they participated in the Children's Day program that Sarah had organized. Once the program concluded at 9:30 p.m., the Moores and the Stillinger sisters returned to the Moores' home, arriving between 9:45 and 10 p.m. Sometimes around midnight or later, they fall asleep. Early the following morning, at 7 a.m. on June 10th, Mary Peckham, who lived next to the Moores, began to worry when she saw that the family had not emerged to tend to their morning tasks. Peckham knocked on the door of the Moores' home. When there was no response, she attempted to open the door and found it to be locked. Peckham then let the Moores' chickens out and contacted Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. Similarly to Mary Peckham, Ross Moore also got no reply when he knocked on the door and shouted. Ross used his house key to unlock the front door. While Peckham waited on the porch, Ross entered the parlor and opened the door to the guest bedroom, discovering the bodies of Ina and Lena Stillinger on the bed. Moore immediately instructed Peckham to contact Henry Hank Horton, the primary peace officer of Villisca, who arrived shortly after. Horton's inspection of the house uncovered that the entire Moore family and the 2 Stillinger girls had been murdered by blunt force. The weapon used in the murders, an axe that belonged to Josiah, was located in the guest room where the Stillinger sisters were found. Friends, a quick reminder. Are you ready to uncover the chilling mysteries of the Villisca Axe Murder House? Dive into the spine-tingling audiobook about this topic and experience the haunting tale like never before. Don't miss out. Click the link in the description and pinned comment to get your free audiobook. Medical experts determined that the killings had occurred sometime between midnight and 5 a.m. 2 discarded cigarettes found in the attic indicated that the murderer or murderers waited quietly in the attic until the Moore family and their guests from the Stillinger family were asleep. The assailantes started in the main bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore were sleeping. Joshua received more blows from the axe than any other victim. His face had been cut to such an extent that his eyes were missing. The ceiling in his room also had a gouge mark from when the murderer lifted the axe to murder him. The assailant used the sharp edge of the axe to kill Sarah, but the blunt end to murder the other family members. Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur, and Paul were bludgeoned to death in the same way as their parents. The killer then returned to the master bedroom to further assault the elderly Moores, knocking over a blood-soaked shoe in the process. Subsequently, they moved to the guest bedroom and killed Ina and Lena. Following these murders, a 4-pound slab of bacon was taken from the refrigerator and placed beside the axe. Investigators also discovered uneaten food and water stained with blood. Unfortunately, the crime scene was later contaminated by individuals who entered to investigate, rendering the murder weapon unusable for forensic analysis. Investigators theorized that all the victims, except Lena Stillinger, were asleep at the time of their murders. They suspected that Lena was awake and attempted to defend herself, as she was found lying sideways on the bed with a defensive injury on her arm. Her nightgown had been pushed up to her waist, and she was not wearing any undergarments, which led law enforcement to speculate that she may have been sexually abused, or that there was an attempt to do so. This speculation was later determined to be incorrect. Nearly a century later, in June 2009, a visitor toured the recently restored home, which is now in the possession of Darwin and Martha Lynn, and sought to reach out to the Stillinger sisters in the exact room where their lives were tragically ended. The visitor asked the girls to turn his flashlight off and on, and they complied each time, leading him to declare, "I am convinced that the spirits of all 8 victims still inhabit this house." Some investigations indicate the family's presence in the house, while several others imply that the killers themselves haunt the place. So if the killer does indeed still reside in this house, how did he originally get in? Investigators speculated that the killer had entered the Moore family residence by taking off the screen from a window on the first floor. However, the findings at the crime scene cast doubt on this entry method, leading to a much more chilling theory. It is believed that the murderer was likely concealed in the Moore's attic, lying in wait while gripping Josiah Moore's axe. However, perhaps the most significant event that showed the killer's lingering presence in the house occurred in 2014. On November 7th, the caretaker, Johnny Hauser, welcomed that evening's overnight visitors. a man in his 50s along with his elderly parents. Hauser observed that the man had a large hunting knife attached to his belt. After checking them in, Hauser left for the night. The following morning, Hauser learned that the man, who had been alone in the house, had been stabbed in the bedroom downstairs the previous night. The knife had been jabbed into his chest, and he lay in a pool of blood until he was found. The injuries sustained by the man were classified as self-inflicted. Amazingly, he survived the incident and eventually went back home years later. When it came to recounting the events of that night, the only thing the man could recall was entering the bedroom to provoke the spirits, and the next thing he knew, he was regaining consciousness in an emergency room. The caretaker observed that the man first apologized to the house for his actions. Hauser mentioned that he does not believe a ghost harmed the man, but he thinks the house might hurt people's minds while they are there. Additionally, the axe used in the murders, which originally belonged to Joshua, was found in the very room where the stabbing happened. Over time, numerous potential suspects came to light, such as Reverend George Kelly, Frank F. Jones, William Mansfield, Paul Mueller, and Henry Lee Moore. The initial suspect identified by the townsfolk was Frank Jones. Frank Jones, an Iowa state senator and local entrepreneur, competed with Joseph Moore. Joshua worked for Jones for 7 years before he started his own business selling agricultural equipment. There were also rumors that Joshua was involved in an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law, although this was never substantiated. The people of Villisca claimed that the two held a strong animosity toward one another. The intense hatred Jones harbored towards the Moore family was questioned by many. Could it have truly driven him to commit such a horrific act, including the senseless murders of the 2 young girls who were merely visiting? Suspicion extended beyond Jones, encompassing every vagrant and stranger in Villisca at the time. One such individual was S.A. Andy Sawyer, a transient worker. S.A. Andy Sawyer was detained by the sheriff after a bridge foreman, Thomas Dyer, witnessed him making a violent threat while working with an axe. Dyer reported that Sawyer had stated, "I will cut your goddamn heads off." However, Sawyer was later released when it was established that he was in Osceola, Iowa, at the time of the murders. Reverend Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly, an English immigrant with a history of mental instability and sexual misconduct, was another individual of interest in the Villisca Axe murders. Kelly, a traveling preacher who conducted services across several states, was in Villisca on June 8th to participate in Children's Day services, an event attended by the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters. He departed town early the following morning via train at 5:19 a.m., reportedly making unsettling remarks to his fellow passengers about 8 individuals brutally murdered in their sleep within Villisca. At that time, the bodies had not yet been found. 2 weeks later, Kelly went back to Villisca. He was said to be pretending to be a detective from Scotland Yard. He examined the crime scene alongside a team of investigators. Furthermore, he had a keen interest in the case, sending letters to law enforcement and the investigators. It was also reported that he sent a blood-stained shirt to a dry cleaner shortly after the killings. Because of his peculiar actions, the police grew wary of Kelly and ultimately took him into custody. He admitted to the murders, saying that God commanded him to let the children come to me. Nonetheless, he withdrew his confession during the trial, alleging police misconduct. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. Reverend Kelly was a small man, standing just 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing 119 pounds. A new jury was assembled. The coroner testified that Kelly lacked the physical ability to commit the crimes. No one else has ever faced trial for the homicides. Another potential suspect was a man named Henry Lee Moore, who is not related to the slain Moore family. Henry was identified as a suspected serial killer and was convicted of murdering his mother and grandmother with a rusty coal axe. He received a life sentence on March 14, 1918. Some speculated that he might have been linked to various unsolved axe murders, including the Villisca Axe murders. However, he was never formally charged in connection with the Moore family killings. On the subject of serial killers, one theory suggests that the Villisca Axe murders were carried out by a serial killer, who was believed to be targeting families in the Midwest, as well as in Texas and Colorado. Researchers have noted that these crimes share multiple characteristics. Besides the fact that all the victims were struck with an axe in several instances, mirrors and windows were also obscured with fabric or clothing. Additionally, in 3 incidents, authorities discovered a lamp without a chimney, with the wick set low at the crime scene. Furthermore, the victims' heads were similarly covered, reminiscent of the Villisca crime scene. Some of these unresolved murders include cases that took place in Colorado Springs, Colorado, Ellsworth, Kansas, and Paola, Kansas. There are theories suggesting that these were the actions of a serial killer, potentially the first in the nation. Detective James Newton Wilkerson considered a man named Glideson Mansfield to be the potential offender, whom Jones might have hired to murder the Moore family. However, according to his payroll records, Mansfield had an alibi for the Villisca killings. Detective Wilkerson believed that Jones's political connections influenced Mansfield's alibi and his subsequent release from detention. After 5 years, a broad investigation failed to uncover any credible suspects. Hauser, the current caretaker of the Villisca Murder House, remarked, "You got murder in a small town with 5 years of gossip. At some point, everyone in town was considered a suspect. Legal actions involving 3 different individuals were initiated, but no one was ever found guilty for the dreadful crimes that occurred against the Moore family and the Stillinger girls." The Villisca Axe murders are considered one of the most notorious unsolved cases in American history. We will never uncover what happened in the Moore family's home on that night in June 1912. This event led to the tragic loss of 8 innocent lives, raising questions about whether the victims of this horrific crime still linger in the residence they once inhabited over a century ago. It remains uncertain if the Villisca Axe Murder House is haunted by those who perished that night, or if the location itself is marked by the profound evil of the unfathomable acts committed by an unidentified killer. These mysteries will continue to go unanswered.